At 10 in the morning, Robert was sharp. Everyone who knew him agreed on this. 30 years as a senior auditor. The kind of man who could hold 12 variables in his head simultaneously and tell you exactly where the numbers didn't add up. Precise, methodical, reliable. That was the word people used about Robert. Reliable. By 2 in the afternoon, he was a different person. Not dramatically different, not confused, not lost. Just slower. A calculation that should have taken 10 seconds took 40. He'd read a paragraph, reached the end, and realized he hadn't absorbed a word. He described it to his wife as a fog rolling in, not sudden, just a gradual dimming, always arriving at almost exactly the same time, almost every single afternoon. He blamed his sleep. He cut out his afternoon coffee. He took longer walks. Nothing changed the timing of that fog. His doctor, at his annual checkup, ran the standard tests. Nothing alarming came back. He was told this was normal, a natural consequence of getting older. Robert, who had spent his career questioning numbers that didn't add up, accepted that explanation. For nearly 2 years, he accepted it. Then someone asked him a question nobody had thought to ask before. What do you usually eat for lunch? That question, so ordinary, so far from what he expected, turned out to be the beginning of the answer he had been looking for. What was happening to Robert every afternoon was not aging. It was a biological event, measurable, predictable, and driven by something that had nothing to do with how old he was. It had everything to do with a cycle that researchers now call the neuroinflammation loop, a feedback system that, once set in motion, feeds itself, getting worse with each turn of the cycle, quietly eroding the brain function that most people believe is simply declining with time. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how that loop works, what keeps it running, and because the title promises you this and I intend to deliver, precisely how to stop it. At around the 8-minute mark, I'm going to tell you about a specific eating pattern that is fueling this loop in the majority of people over 65. A pattern that doesn't look unhealthy from the outside, that your doctor has almost certainly never flagged, and that may be the single most direct driver of what you experience as afternoon cognitive decline. I'll give you the specifics. I want you to think about your own lunch when I do. I've spent more than 3 decades in geriatric medicine, and the research on neuroinflammation has moved faster in the last 5 years than in the previous 50. What used to be a theory is now a mechanism we can trace step by step. And once you understand the steps, the way to interrupt them becomes clear. Let me start with the loop itself, because before you can stop something, you need to understand what it's doing. Your brain is protected by a specialized population of immune cells called microglia. Think of them as the brain's security system, always scanning, always watching, ready to respond to any signal of danger. Under normal conditions, they do their job and stand down. They activate when there's a threat and deactivate when the threat is gone. In an aging brain with an aging gut, they stop standing down. Here is the sequence. Chronic gut inflammation, driven by reduced bacterial diversity and the dominance of pro-inflammatory bacterial species, produces compounds called lipopolysaccharides, or LPS. These are essentially fragments of the outer wall of certain bacteria, and to your immune system, they look like an invasion. When LPS levels in the bloodstream rise, the brain's security system activates. The microglia switch on. They begin releasing inflammatory molecules called cytokines, specifically TNF-alpha, IL-1 beta, and IL-6, into the brain tissue. In the short term, this is protective. In the long term, it is destructive. Because here is where the loop begins. Chronic microglial activation, cytokines circulating continuously through the brain, damages the neurons responsible for memory consolidation. It disrupts the blood-brain barrier, making it more permeable to additional inflammatory signals from the bloodstream. And this is the part that makes the loop self-sustaining. Those inflammatory signals travel back down to the gut, through the vagus nerve and the immune system, where they damage the intestinal lining further, increase its permeability, and allow more LPS to enter the bloodstream. The brain inflames the gut inflames the brain. Each cycle makes the next one easier to trigger and harder to interrupt. This is the neuroinflammation loop. and it runs continuously in millions of people over 65 without producing a single result on a standard blood test or neurological exam. Have you noticed that you feel mentally clearest in the morning, and that the clearest part of your day gets shorter as the years go on? That is the loop tightening. And what drives it to peak in the afternoon is something most people eat every day without thinking. I want to come back to Robert's lunch, because when someone finally asked the question and listened to the answer, what he described was something that would look perfectly reasonable to almost anyone. A turkey sandwich on whole wheat bread, a handful of crackers, maybe some soup from a can, a glass of orange juice. From the outside, a sensible meal, not excessive, not unhealthy by the standard advice most people have been given. From the gut's perspective, a significant load of rapidly digested carbohydrates arriving all at once, feeding the exact bacteria driving his inflammation loop. The whole wheat bread with its refined flour base, the crackers, the processed soup with its sugar and additives, the orange juice, 12 grams of sugar with the fiber removed. Within 90 minutes of that meal, the pro-inflammatory bacteria in Robert's gut were metabolizing those carbohydrates and releasing compounds that caused a measurable spike in systemic inflammation. That spike crossed the blood-brain barrier. His microglia, already in a state of chronic low-grade activation, responded to the added signal by intensifying their cytokine release. Blood flow to his prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for the precise thinking that had defined his career, was transiently reduced. 2 o'clock every afternoon. The fog arrived on schedule because the biology was on schedule. The inflammation loop has a clock, and Robert's lunch was setting it. Now, the 8-minute mark. I told you I would be specific. The dietary pattern driving this loop in the majority of people over 65 is not junk food. It is not obvious. It is refined carbohydrates hidden inside foods that carry a health reputation they no longer deserve. White flour products labeled whole grain. Breakfast cereals marketed as heart healthy. Crackers, breads, and wraps with 5-grain names and refined flour as their primary ingredient. Fruit juices without fiber. Low-fat products that replace fat with sugar. These foods convert rapidly to glucose in the gut, feeding proteobacteria and fusobacteria, the bacterial families most associated with LPS production and intestinal inflammation. They do not cause the loop by themselves, but they are its primary fuel, and the people most likely to eat them are the people who have been following dietary advice for decades, advice that emphasized lowering fat and increasing grains, without distinguishing between whole, fiber-rich grains and the refined products sold in their name. Robert was not eating badly. He was eating the way he had been told to eat. And it was feeding a cycle that was costing him his sharpest hours every day. Here is the part I want you to hold on to. Because the neuroinflammation loop is not a permanent state. It is a cycle. And cycles can be interrupted at multiple points simultaneously. The research on breaking this loop has accelerated significantly. What we know now is that 3 specific interventions, each targeting a different point in the cycle, can reduce neuroinflammation measurably and restore cognitive function in ways that used to be considered impossible in an aging brain. Your brain is not in irreversible decline. It is inflamed. Those are not the same thing. 3 steps, all evidence-based, all starting today. The first is the pre-meal fiber move. Before every meal that contains refined carbohydrates, or instead of them, eat a small amount of fiber-rich food first. A handful of almonds, half an avocado, a few stalks of raw broccoli, a small apple. Eating fiber before refined carbs does 2 things. It slows glucose absorption, reducing the post-meal bacterial inflammatory spike, and it delivers prebiotic fiber to the beneficial bacteria that keep the pro-inflammatory species in check. 10 minutes before your meal. 2 or 3 bites of something whole and fibrous. This one change, implemented consistently, begins to alter the post-meal inflammatory pattern within 2 weeks. The second is the DHA priority. Most omega-3 supplements are formulated for heart health, EPA dominant, which is appropriate for cardiovascular inflammation. For neuroinflammation, DHA is the molecule that matters. DHA integrates specifically into the membranes of brain cells and microglia, and it changes how those cells respond to LPS signals. Research has shown that DHA-rich supplementation can reduce microglial reactivity, meaning the same inflammatory signal produces a smaller, shorter response. The best dietary sources are fatty cold water fish, wild salmon, sardines, mackerel, herring, 2 to 3 servings per week. If supplementing, look specifically for DHA-dominant fish oil, or, for those who prefer a plant-based option, algae-derived DHA, which is what the fish themselves obtain from their diet and is highly bioavailable. The third is the polyphenol interruption. 3 foods contain compounds that specifically cross the blood-brain barrier and directly reduce microglial activation, interrupting the loop at its neurological endpoint rather than just its gut origin. Wild blueberries contain anthocyanins that accumulate in brain tissue and measurably reduce cytokine production in microglia. Extra virgin olive oil contains a compound called oleocanthal that inhibits the same inflammatory enzymes as ibuprofen, but specifically in brain tissue. And curcumin, the active compound in turmeric, has been shown to reduce IL-1 beta and TNF-alpha in the brain, but only when consumed with black pepper, which increases its bioavailability by 2,000%. A small handful of wild blueberries. A tablespoon of quality olive oil on your salad or vegetables. A quarter teaspoon of turmeric with a crack of black pepper in something warm. These are not dramatic interventions, they are precise ones. Go back to where we began. Robert's afternoon fog was not a mystery. It was a timetable. His gut bacteria, fed at noon, were producing an inflammatory signal that peaked at 2 and dimmed the most precise mind he had spent a lifetime building. What changed for Robert was not a medication, not a diagnosis, and not an acceptance of decline. It was understanding what the loop was, what was feeding it, and where it was most vulnerable. Within 6 weeks of changing what he ate before and at lunch, the timing of his fog began to shift. Within 3 months, the fog had largely lifted. He still works. Part-time, by choice. His wife says the reliable man is back. If someone you love has been told that what they are experiencing is just getting older, the fog, the fatigue, the edges of memory that feel less sharp than they used to, share this video with them. Because the loop is not inevitable, it is interruptible, and knowing that it has a name is the first step to stopping it. Before you close this video, I want to ask you to do one simple thing for the next 3 days. After each lunch at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, rate your mental clarity on a scale of 1 to 10, just one number, then write down briefly what you ate. That is it. 3 days, 3 numbers. Because next week, I'm going to share what researchers found when they mapped post-meal inflammatory markers against specific foods in adults over 65, and the eating patterns that kept the afternoon cognitive decline from arriving at all. You will be able to look at your own 3 days and see exactly how closely your experience matches what the science predicts. The pattern, when you see it laid out, is difficult to ignore. One important note before you go. Everything in this video is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for the advice of your personal physician. If you are considering changing your diet significantly or adding any supplement, please speak with your doctor first, particularly if you take blood-thinning medications, as omega-3 fatty acids can interact with those. The goal of this video is to give you a framework and better questions. Bring them to your next appointment. That conversation is one of the most valuable things you can have.